Welcome to Coffee Conversations, mini episodes by victims and villains. And we're recording on the go for this episode. And we're talking about the brand new supernatural thriller, Sator. I am your host, Captain Soldier, and I'm joined by staff writer, Mr. Mark Moore.
Hola!
All right, so Sator tells the story of this family that lives in middle of nowhere that is haunted by a demon named Satyr, or what we believe to be a supernatural entity. And we're just going to jump right into this. This movie comes out, it hits, will be available on Apple TV, Amazon, Google Play, Microsoft, and more beginning February 9th. So as you're hearing this episode, you guys can go check it out on any of your favorite streaming platforms. Mark, you got a chance to see this movie before I did. You were the one that said, hey, we should do an episode on this movie. What were your general spoiler-free thoughts on this movie?
So it is one of those kind of slow burn horror movies, but overall, I think what kind of makes it stand out is how the movie was done. Just it gives a very solid kind of isolated feeling the entire movie that a lot of these slow burn movies haven't really had. They've all got their atmosphere, but this one, it's just, to me, it was almost the main achievement of the movie was the feeling that it gives you of just isolation, the whole movie, from the way it was done in general.
I think for me, what really makes this story so impactful is the way that this isn't just something that you're experiencing from a random happenstance of somebody picking up a Ouija board and experiencing the after effects in that way, where you have something like The Exorcist where you have a young child that is just by happenstance just happens to be encounter a demon. And I think what really makes this film so great and so unique is just how simple it is, but complex at the same time. And you had joked around with me saying that when I first watched it, that I was gonna have to do multiple viewings of it to kind of get a better grasp of it. And before we get into our spoiler impressions, I just want to point out the fact that Jordan Graham is the gentleman that made this entire film come to life. He is the director, the producer, the writer, the composer, the cinematographer, and the editor for this. This movie has been done for 6 years, but it is now only now seeing the light of day, just because of budgetary limitations that Graham had faced. This is your official spoiler warning, so if you guys haven't seen Satyr yet, we're gonna get into it. And I think for me, the thing that really stuck out to me more than anything else in this movie was the generational curses and the generational bloodlines with Satyr, and how it only impacted, or at least seemed to have effect on Pete rather than his sister Evie and Adam. I think that was a very bold narrative choice that I just kind of felt like really worked for me. I felt like the more that the film went on, the more that you were kind of learning how tied this family was to Satyr and his supernatural presence, the way that some families are to God. I thought that it felt so natural, the way that it kept peeling these layers back.
So one of the things, like I said, it has this feeling of isolation in the whole movie, and a lot of that came from the lack of soundtrack and music. And it took place in the woods, and a lot of the camera shots are very wide open shots of forest. Um, Even during the winter scenes, the way it was done, you don't know how much time has passed. And there's scenes with Pete where they show him just kind of staring off in the distance and trying to get his attention, like he's losing track of time, getting lost in what's going on. And that lack of soundtrack and the way they did some of these open shots and no real coherent timeline as to how long between things, kind of helped build on what he was feeling isolated out there in the cabin by himself.
I think for me, the lack of soundtrack in this, I feel like, kind of makes that tension grow all that much more. To where I don't know if you know this or not, but when John Carpenter took an early draft of Halloween into his investors that were distributing it, or that were backing it rather, they had said that it wasn't scary. And so when he brought it back in with music, it a different scene. And I don't honestly know if adding music to Satyr would work. It's because I think one of the things that Graham does so well with this script is the lack of music, because as a film watcher, you are trained to look for those cues, and the lack of soundtrack and the lack of sound really in this. I think me and you were texting as I was watching this. There's like nothing really happens for, I think, the first word isn't uttered until like 15 minutes in.
Something like that. Yeah, it's a little while before they actually start talking.
And by the time that you actually, because you have such a silent movie, it makes the scares that much more effective when you actually get to it, because there are things that genuinely catch you off guard. And this movie is a very darkly lit movie too, which I think also helps to continue that feeling of dread.
Yes and no. Um, it had its dark lit scenes, but overall, most of it took place during the daytime. It's just the scenes that actually built on any sort of suspense were at night, which ended up giving you your dark scenes like you're talking about. But overall, it was primarily at the day, during the daytime, a lot of it. Even closer to the end when he's running from the cabin out through the woods, he's it's in the middle of the daytime as he's trudging through the snow almost. Um, so I think it's more of they give you the sound of the forest with no soundtrack and very little talking. With this, is Satyr real? Is he not? And hearing the creaking and things like that that kind of really make it build.
You talked about it in your review about how you had a lot more questions than you felt answers, and I think as we were kind of talking about this, I had kind of like a deja vu to us doing Starfish last year, or sorry, 2019, or like I don't know how or what I've gotten myself into with this movie, and I think that's kind of the genius of Satyr, is it introduces this idea of generational trauma that is passed down from um, generate from one generation to the next, and what staying quiet really ends up ultimately doing in the long run. There's a scene in particular where it's this film has like black and white sequences that are flashbacks. You're understanding how Pete ends up being in the forest, and you're also kind of understanding why his family placed him there. And but you're also getting to explore his family relationship with Sater, and his mother. It's like a birthday party or something, and his mother is like just looking through these like old documents in the bedroom, and she's like talking to Sator, and one of the siblings walks in with the camera, and she just shuts them out. And you see that consistently throughout the film, to where there is this underlining issue in relationship, almost kind of bordering on Stockholm, with Sator, that is abusive, but no one really wants to address it. And you get to kind of see the weight of how that affects Pete throughout the course of this movie, and then how that is also illustrated through the backstory as well.
I took it more of showing that there was some sort of mental illness more than anything else, because a lot of mental illnesses tend to be genetic and passed down. And you've got Nanny, who is the grandma. She's got dementia and everything. In a lot of the scenes you see, she doesn't even remember her own grandson in a couple of them. But they show like flashback scenes of her talking to the corner, to the air. And then you've got the mom with her scene, kind of freaking out and shutting him out of the room, where she's in there kind of talking to herself and everything. And then you've got what's going on with Pete, where he's kind of blanking out, doing weird stuff, and out paranoid in the middle of the woods. You also have Adam too, who they indicate is an alcoholic. They don't outright say it, but one scene shows him having the shakes and DTs, looking for some moonshine. In the beginning, and then later in the film, they talk about picking him up from a facility. And so there's a underlying mental illness and overall illness with the family in general. Now, is it genetic, or is it caused by Sator, who's been influencing this family for generations, supposedly? And that's one of the things that kind of plays into the overall story of what's happening. Is all this crazy just illness, or is it actually influence over the family?
And I think that's kind of where you start to take into your account kind of like your own beliefs and what you believe. Like, do you believe that, because, obviously we know that you can inherit diseases and mental illness from, one generation to the next. But I think also too, like, you can inherit stuff like addiction. My family, I would argue, has that run through it. My mom is a serious smoker. I have people in my family that borderline on alcoholics. I've also had my own tendencies to drift towards addiction, whether that has been in a pornographic sense or alcohol. And a large portion of that is, I would argue, has been because of uh, genetic traits that have either been instilled into me or have been passed down to me. And I think that's one of the things that Sator does really well, is that it kind of opens up that conversation to say that, it could be this supernatural deity that is causing all these influences, whether that is alcoholism, whether that is, these mental illness, and everyone is basically reacting to my influence differently, or it could be the generational trauma and not really talking about it. And I think that, when you Sator's a great example of what happens when you don't kind of confront um, mental illness or mental health issues, because in the end, the heartbreaking part about the story is that Sator ultimately ends up getting Pete. At the end of this movie, he ends up kind of conforming to this cult, I guess, for like lack of a better word.
Yeah, the influence of Sator and his followers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so he ends up kind of like falling in line, ends up committing some murders before the end of the film, and I think a large portion of that, like how much of the story would have been differently had your, mother or grandmother, or someone else in your family talk to you a little bit more about Seder and about, mental health and mental illness instead of, actually taking you somewhere to get help rather than just kind of shoving you in the middle of nowhere and having you fend for yourself.
Well, they kind of indicated in the movie that, oh, that's just crazy grandma. She's always been that way, and things like that. Like they just thought it was old age and dementia and stuff, and her kind of losing it due to old age, and that the mom was sick. And um, they said something about Pete, and I don't remember what it was now, but they said something about him, but he was having the same type of issues too. And it kept circling the more, because I watched it that morning and was just like, I have no clue what I watched. And then I watched it again that night, a second time, just to make sure I didn't miss something. And to me, it almost, watching it the second time, it almost came across more as like a metaphor for like mental illness or schizophrenia or something like that, as opposed to a just straight up horror flick.
And I mean, it very well could be, and I think that's kind of what this film is every bit an art house film. It gave me like vibes of like Midsummer, like Hereditary, just having those like really slow burns, but it's like being effective at the same time. I did want to ask though, like, how did you kind of feel about the fact that, as we're kind of exploring these backstories through these black and white flashbacks, how did you feel about the fact that up until Pete, most of the relationship or the influence of Satyr had been dumped onto females, and then it really affected him as kind of this generation rather than Evie?
She left. They talked about her leaving, essentially leaving the area. Adam and Pete didn't. So if you look at the story as a whole, it could have simply just been that, yeah, Sater was screwing with the family and the sister left. So she wasn't being influenced.
But here's the thing about demons is that you can leave a location, but demons are not of this world. They can go wherever you go.
Well, they don't say that it's a demon though. That's the thing. They
True.
indicate more that it's some sort of supernatural entity than a demon.
I mean, supernatural entity. An entity can, like, is not of this world. Can still, the demon rules still apply to an entity.
I mean, yeah, if you want to go that route, it could be. But they generally, the terms deity or demon have their own connotations to them. And first thing that comes to mind. So that's what you're getting into.
I mean, that's a fair point. I guess it's interesting to me that I've never really, I guess every lore and like every mythology that kind of has like demons and like entities are uh very married to a exclusive like trinket or location, but they also kind of like downplay what it can be. And that's one of the reasons I think The Exorcist is one of the best movies ever made on demonic activity, because like it showcases like it can go with you. Paranormal Activity, thinking of it now, also too, the first one is another great example. Um, but it's interesting to me that the rules of this universe are we're going to keep it in one location, and I think that keeps in line with the overall tone of the movie, because there's an intimacy to this movie that I feel like I haven't seen in a lot of other horror movies, and I really enjoyed the intimacy that this movie brought.
The closest thing I could think to it would be The Witch,
Yeah.
where they're all just out in the woods where they've been exiled from the local colony or village or whatever, and they're just stuck out in the woods going insane. So,
Yeah, and I think that kind of enriched the experience for me is, because you're stripping everything down. You're having a lot of this like mystery that's kind of like built upon it. And one of the things I think that's like a really great example of the mystery and the lore of this movie is the scene in particular where Pete is he had just changed the deer cam and he's like obsessed with this picture, so he prints it and he like gets ready to burn it. And I don't know about you, but like I was like looking at the screen, I was like, what am I seeing? Like it just looks like trees. And then when he goes to brighten up the picture and it's like the cult of Sator, I thought that was like a really nice touch. Uh,
I saw that coming from the moment they showed that picture. I knew that was coming. So that
okay.
was almost like a letdown to me because of how predictable it was.
See, it got me. It got me.
It,
I
it
mean,
might
like it
be.
didn't scare me, but like it caught me off guard.
It might just be because I've watched so many horror movies over the years and I'm jaded to what they do.
That's fair.
But it's as soon as they showed that picture, I was like, yep, there's going to be something there and they're going to do something to brighten up the picture. And sure enough, like a half hour later, that's exactly what they did. And all the members were standing there. I was like, yep.
Well, they keep coming back to it, so like, of course, I'm gonna think that like something's in the picture, but I'm like, I'm waiting to see it because like now I'm trained as a viewer to like make sure that I'm checking like every like crevice and corner of the sequence to like know if something's like truly there or something. And
Yeah, because a lot of the scenes, the way they shot them, I kept watching the backgrounds because that's
yeah,
just a typical thing in a lot of horror movies, even these slow burn ones that have taken off over the last decade. There's something going on in the background a lot of times in a lot of these scenes, and that's how a lot of it was shot. But nothing happened. And that kind of messed with me more than anything else was the lack of activity more so than the activity that actually happened.
yeah, yeah. The lack of activity I think is kind of also another good thing that kind of caught me off guard. That definitely kept me on edge because I kind of wanted to know and see how this film was going to unfold and really kind of get to know this this guy a little bit better and kind of understand his family history. And we had talked about this back and forth. Um, you were not a fan of the black and white flashbacks.
So they had two different type of black and white flashbacks. They had some that were very obvious what they were. They were almost like video footage of Nanny doing her weird stuff, talking to Sater. So those really weren't the issue. But then you had some black and white scenes with another character, and I think they may have only been with her, but they also had her in some scenes that were color too. So I'm not quite sure what the purpose of having those scenes be in black and white were.
So they were trying to establish the relationship that Pete had with her, because she really, it's never established whether or not she's in the family. At least it didn't come across it like me, but she is a kind of, I would say, maybe like a childhood friend, maybe like a close neighbor that has grown up with these guys, and so she kind of understands a little bit more of what's going on as far as like the satyr thing is concerned. And she actually ultimately ends up being a part of satyr in the end. I think there's even a scene where she actually kills one of Pete's family members, and we kind of see her gathered around Pete.
So the way they showed her, they never showed her around anybody else. And it made me wonder if it was his hallucination.
That very well could be because all the scenes that she had were with other people. So in that regard, you could also make the case that Sator was also a figment of his imagination, and it
Which
couldn't.
very well could have been.
It
Which,
could have very well meant that like the entire movie maybe either didn't happen, or B, in the end when he ends up kind of killing everybody and goes to be with Sator, that it's actually an allegory for him committing suicide.
or just finally losing it. I mean, it's not unusual to hear in the news or see stories of people with mental illness killing people because of their mental illness and not getting it treated. You've got the grandma talking to people that aren't there and seeing people that aren't there. You've got the mom who was she was a French fry short of a Happy Meal from what they talked about and showed her, and she killed the grandfather, her father.
Yeah.
That scene they show that at the beginning. Um, and then you've got it comes down to Pete in the middle of the woods in isolation by himself dealing with the mental illness of the family. It's very well possible he started hallucinating and lost it, and his brother came in to kind of get him, and that was that. He took him out.
It's also, what are the chances also that like my only like hesitation with kind of like diving into that like ideology is what are the chances that all three or all the people that suffer with mental illness to varying degrees in his family are all seeing the same entity of Sator. Like that's my only hang up. It's like two people having the same exact dream.
I mean, there are case studies of mass hysteria. So why couldn't that have applied in this case if they were all three having issues with mental illness? You've got the grandma talking about it all the time, very open about it with the mom who's crazy, and they're very open about it with Pete and Adam and Evie.
I guess to a degree I can see and understand where you're coming from in that regard. Um, yeah, I guess I can understand that. Um, I think for me the flashbacks are interesting portions of them. I think you need them honestly for the movie to kind of have a lot more gravity. Um,
You talking about the flashbacks with the grandma?
yes, because I feel like if you don't have those flashbacks, then this is Sator is nothing more than a character study of a man kind of losing it in the woods, a la Jack Torrance in The Shining.
Yeah.
Um, you kind of understand a little bit more of the relationship between this entity, whether it's real or not, with its ties to its family and how its ties are generational in Deliverance. And that for me, I think, is kind of really what brought this film up from uh, what could have been a really subpar movie. I think that those sequences, especially the way that they're shot, because they are entirely like old school Hollywood. You have those kind of like 4:3 ratios when you're watching them. Whereas the rest of the movie that's taking place in present day is all 16:9. Um, I really dug that added touch. It kind of made it a little bit more ominous and eerie for my viewing experience.
I really thought that the grandma was the best character and actor in the movie. I
I
really
think
did.
I think if I remember correctly and what I read, that was actually the uh, director's actual late grandmother. So that's actually legitimate. And she added a whole nother layer of really eeriness for me. Um, I felt like she was just kind of like really, really creepy in like the best way possible. She kind of gave me like almost Lin Shay vibes, if you can see that at all.
I thought she was the most interesting character of the bunch. Um,
That's fair too.
everybody else was just kind of. I mean, I get Pete, I understand that, but the brother was kind of bland and flat. The sister was just kind of wound up. The one or two scenes they showed her, and all the characters you dealt with, to me, just kind of felt flat. But she had the most
That's fair.
character to her and was the most likable in the whole thing. And it, yeah, I liked her character the most in it. Talking about, I read an article about the movie once we started talking about it that I think didn't the director also build the cabin in like his backyard on his property?
I did not know that, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, this guy poured a lot of his heart and soul into this project, and casting your own grandmother, having uh, everything done from editing, cinematography, writing, producing, scoring it, and I mean, he just really poured a lot into it. And Jordan Graham is the MVP of this movie, but kind of jumping into going off what you're talking about with the characters in this movie, I also think too it's it's an I think the reason why the grandmother kind of feels the most fleshed out is because really the story relates kind of from her perspective to Pete's perspective, because you're kind of seeing really where a lot of the satyr origins began, kind of how they're fleshing out in modern day. I think that's the reason why a lot of the other characters that are, whether it's the mom, the brother, the sister, they all kind of feel like just one note and really
Yeah,
kind of don't have a whole lot to do.
she just felt like she had the most character to her overall, ups and downs, whole 9 yards. Where Pete was very flat, and there's something in the woods, and I've got to go see my family. And the grandma, she was laughing, even when she was trying to figure out who her grandkids were, where the dementia was kicking in, to talking about satyr. She was just happy and lively, and she just had a fuller range than everybody else did.
I can definitely, yeah, I can definitely understand that. So, putting it through our Rorschach rating scale, 0 to 5, halves being allowed, where would it rank for you?
I put it at a 3.5, simply because it fell into a lot of the cliches these slow burn horror movies are falling into.
That's fair. Yeah, yeah. It's slow burn horror, and by this point is kind of now a, I don't want to say a dying trend, but definitely like it's definitely a little bit more predictable than it was when it was like really hot like 10 years ago.
Yeah, the only one really doing anything good with it right now is the what's his name, Ari.
Ari Arster.
Yeah, he's doing some decent stuff with the slow burn because he does things to keep you involved in the movie without it being like a Friday the 13th or something. This, I could have given it better if something had happened instead of it just kind of dragging the whole movie until the last 15 minutes.
I definitely thought you were going to go a little bit lower, so I am going to say that this movie for me is definitely a 3 out of 5. I think that it, this is a impressive film, to say the least. This is Graham's second movie that he's ever done, and to have not only your family cast it, but to build your sets and to do everything that this man has done for the movie. I think that he does a really tremendous job in that respect, but I think some of his resources as an entertainer were stretched a little bit thin, where you kind of have these you kind of have these events in the film that are stretched thin because of uh yeah, just characters not being developed, or your mythology not really being as full as it could be, or your lore. And I think that's another thing we didn't really talk about. This movie doesn't even clock in at 90 minutes.
Yeah, it seemed like
85.
it was missing just a little something.
Yeah, I feel like this is a movie that has a really great framework that could need a maybe like a 20-minute extension, because I think that it does really effectively with everything that it does. But I think this movie, the last act of this movie, is just kind of takes this really slow perch, and then it just rips the carpet out from underneath of you and just rushes to the end.
Yeah, and when it hits the end and you start seeing some of the creepy stuff in the cabin and dealing with all the weird junk other than just hearing some noises here and there, it really does a good job. It's just it drags its way there.
Yeah. So, you guys can find us. You guys can find the movie Satyr. We'll provide a link in the description for you guys wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. And more importantly, if you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause in America as of this recording. There are 132 suicides that occur each and every day. And when you scale back to international numbers, there are 800,000 successful suicides that take place annually. That's roughly one death every 40 seconds. So please, if you or someone you know is struggling, feel free to reach out to us or any number of our suicide prevention resources in our library, all of which you guys can find in the show notes wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. But Mark, you are a miniature painter.
Yep.
Where can people find you online?
I've got a Instagram titanium juggernaut painting. It's probably the easiest way to find me, and send me a message if you need something painted.
And you guys can follow my film journey over on Letterboxd. I am at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and wherever you guys get your podcasts from. Just simply search Victims and Villains or go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can get all of those resources, include more episodes from us, me and Mark, also write movie reviews for the website, and most importantly, the aforementioned suicide prevention library. So we thank you guys for checking out this episode on Satyr. We hope you guys enjoyed it. We're going to go get some coffee. We'll see you guys in the next one.